Hi, Blue Wire listeners. I'm Greg Olson. I'm excited to partner with Blue Wire to bring you TE1, a podcast where I interview the tight ends who have revolutionized the position. Listen in as I have raw, in-depth conversations with the all-time greats like Shannon Sharpe, Tony Gonzalez, Travis Kelce, and George Kittle. We'll explore how the tight end position has changed over the last 60 years and what it takes to be the very best. Subscribe to TE1 from Blue Wire Studios today, so you're ready for the August premiere.
What is up, Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale coming at you without my fantastic co-host Adam Spinella today, but I am super pleased to be joined by not only frequent guest, but I would say close friend of the podcast, Adam Spinella. He is a Dickinson College assistant men's basketball coach and also a writer for Celtics Blog. If you are not following him on Twitter already, please remedy that immediately at Spinella14, Spinella 14. It's spelled exactly as it sounds, basically. Adam, how are you doing?
Doing great, Dan. Thank you for having me on. It's always good to be back here, and I know that whenever I arrive, I am the preeminent Adam on the podcast. Sorry, Mr. Frommel, but it's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's funny because I called you Adam this time, and I think I call the other Adam too on the podcast, but I call you both when I'm DMing you or texting you, but not Adam. You're Spins to me, and from like way back in the NBA math days, and then I call him Fro. So there's almost no actual Adam in my book, even though there are those two Adams.
I think it's just my girlfriend, my mother, and maybe one other person in this world that call me Adam.
What do they call you?
Everyone calls me Spins. You got it. Yeah.
Oh, I thought I was unique with that. That's really disappointing.
That's the brand these days. I think it's just the last name. It sticks. It's easy.
It is a cool nickname, so I won't penalize myself for unoriginality there because it's a fun nickname. But I did bring you on to talk about hoops because we've already seen some hoops via the scrimmages, and the Disney bubble is off and running. The regular season is going to tip off on this upcoming Thursday. Hopefully everyone's listening to this on a Monday or a Tuesday. And so I thought it'd be good to go through the biggest question facing every NBA team inside the Disney bubble, like what they're trying to answer for the rest of the year. And we're going to do the remaining 9 Eastern Conference teams. So are you ready to get started here?
Always ready, Dan. Let's do this.
So we made the executive decision to go in reverse record order of the teams that are inside the Disney bubble. And that means that we're beginning with the Washington Wizards. What is your biggest question for them? And I hope it's the one that you texted me yesterday.
So, for those wondering, the question I asked Dan was why? Why?
For them in Phoenix, just why, and then we can move on.
Right. Now, the biggest question for me, I mean, you have to think about this in kind of a tiered layer in the whole Eastern Conference. There's really 3 teams that I think are main top contenders. There's 3 that are in that middle of the pack that are kind of jockeying for position in those like 4 through 6 seeds and potentially could make a run. And then there's those kind of 6 through 9 teams that are injury depleted or maybe just a few too many steps behind those top caliber tier teams to make an impact. And I think Washington, with their record and the kind of injury depleted roster they have, they need to look at this process a little bit from a future perspective and see what they can gain long-term into some of their guys. So the biggest question for me is trying to figure out what Rui Hachimura and Troy Brown can give them that resembles starters production. And Dan, I don't know if you have any thoughts on those two guys and kind of their development or progression over the last year, but that's really what I'm watching with Washington.
Yeah, that was my same question for them. It was basically, do they have it was more so a swing piece on this roster that maybe, do they get a performance from anyone that might help them figure out what goes on this offseason when Davis Bertans is a free agent and you're going to be dealing with the Bradley Beal trade stuff. You know that John Wall is going to come back next season. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on, for Troy Brown Jr., for me, I want to see them give him more pick and roll volume and just see how that ends up working out. For Rui Hachimura, though, I'm very interested to see what you think of him because I was actually, in preparation of this, I was watching because it feels like a zillion years since I saw he or the Wizards play. And no, that's me copying too. I did not watch. I think they've played one scrimmage so far. I did not watch it. But so I was going back and watching film on him, and he just looks, I don't want to say I feel like he has this great feel for the game, but there's so many aspects of his game that just look smooth. He was shooting almost 50% on pull-up twos before the All-Star break. He makes some of the normal rookie mistakes with the ball in his hand where I feel like his dribble is too high or his handle's just not tight enough. And he needs to get used to NBA length, I think, on some of his passes. But then I watch some of the passes that he's throwing. I know he doesn't have the highest assist rate, but I feel like he's also making pretty good reads. And so I'm watching him and then even the decisions that he'll make in transition. And I just feel like there's an outline of a really good basketball player there.
Yeah, he's kind of going to become that front court piece that's the kind of, jack of all trades, master of none, for lack of a better term. Like, he's an above average passer, and he has that good feel like you're talking about. His jump shot has really come along over the last 2 years. And the thing that I love about Hachimura is he's got that rebound and run potential. Like, if you look at what the Raptors are doing, that is providing them consistency in the post-Kawhi type of format, it's because Pascal Siakam is so good at grabbing a defensive rebound, pushing it up the floor, and either scoring in transition or making the right play. And that's a really valuable skill in the modern NBA. I think Hachimura can be that guy, but like you talk about, is it consistency with him? Is it just there's something where you're always left wanting just a little bit more? And hopefully he can be a focal point a little bit here in this bubble to come out of his shell and show us really what that ceiling can be for him.
He's definitely going to have to, and I do feel like this is always a reflexive response when the percentages are so low, but he's going to have to take and make more three-pointers, I think, to really make defenses respect his game, and then you can get into situations where maybe you trust him in the half court to handle the ball a little bit more.
Yep, and I think the same goes for Brown a little bit, too. He has to prove that he's going to be trusted with the ball in his hands, because the one thing that Bradley Beal needs is someone to create shots for him. And I know there's hope that John Wall will be that guy, eventually, but he needs guys on the wings and in that front court position who can both make shots and facilitate a little bit. And hopefully that's Hachimura. Hopefully that's Brown, but they're two pretty important pieces for the long term, just to develop and say, hey, what are they going to do in these two categories?
And it better be high volume, like while the Wizards are in Disney World. And so, over those 8 games, like, let's see I want to see Rui taking I don't know, 18 to 20 shots a game or something just along those lines. Maybe even ditto for Troy Brown at this point.
And look, the Wizards are going to be an interesting team to watch for the next couple weeks, because if we thought they were the worst defensive team in the NBA before all this, which they were statistically, it's going to be interesting to watch here.
I feel like the way 2020 has gone, we're going to end up having a play-in tournament for the 8th seed in the East and then not the West somehow. That would just be the most 2020 outcome to the end of the regular season.
Yeah, oh boy.
Hardwood Knocks listeners, have you ever heard of DealDash.com? It's the best, most honest bidding site where you can win things you'd never expect at a price you'd never believe. They have over 1,000 auctions every day on electronics, appliances, beauty products, home decor, and even cars. Here's how it works. It's like an auction, but every item starts at $0 and only goes up 1 cent every time you bid. The kicker is that the auction clock restarts after just 10 seconds. That means every time you bid, everyone else has 10 seconds to answer or the item is yours. If you go ahead and buy now, DealDash is offering our listeners an extra 100 free bids upon sign up on top of their other discounts. Go to DealDash.com and use the offer code KNOX, or go to DealDash.fm/Knox. That's DealDash.fm/Knox. DealDash.fm/Knox.
Speaking of a potential East play-in tournament, the Orlando Magic are next up. And so what's your question for them?
So similarly, they're in that bottom tier there, and I think it all centers around the progress that Markelle Fultz is making. So if we're thinking about one player that we're really watching, honing in on, that's going to be important for us, like, I'm really trying to figure out how sustainable Markelle Fultz's offensive production can be on a high level. Like, Orlando doesn't have great shooting around him, and we know that he's struggled with his jump shot. That's why the Sixers didn't want him anymore. But can he be productive nonetheless? Yes. Can he be productive on a team and in a system that is, by and large, built on, like, big switchable wings and not great 3-point shooters. That's kind of the missing piece to me.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by him still, but I almost just feel like he doesn't have that swing factor to him anymore. Maybe if his jump shot was a little bit more reliable, or you could get him, or if he was getting to the free throw line more, even. I still just don't. It's not that I feel like he's a good NBA player. I just question whether all the stuff that's coming out of Orlando, they seem really high on him, and I just question whether he still has that capability to be, like, let's say the third or fourth best player on a really, really good team.
Yeah, he's a different type of player, like he's best in transition, he's best in the open floor, and Orlando is the type of team that's going to be a pretty sturdy defensive unit and going to be able to rebound the ball and let him play in transition. But how they thrive in the half court right now, it's been heavily predicated on like set plays and great coaching from Steve Clifford. That they need to get a little bit more just who's going to go get a shot late clock and kind of create something for themselves or an easy look for somebody else. And it has to be Fultz. So he's one guy that I'm really curious to see how he's doing and what progress he's made over the last few months.
And so I actually feel like it could be another player, which is my question for them, is whether is can Aaron Gordon kind of like make that next little jump, because his playmaking really improved towards the second part of this year. He's averaging 5 assists over his last 25 games. A lot of that stuff, they've had him run some more pick and rolls, and Steve Clifford has complimented his decision-making out of the pick and rolls, but he's even thrown better passes out of the post. There's been times, a lot of it, it might be easier stuff where he's standing still and kind of surveying the floor and letting cuts develop or something like that, but he's thrown some nice passes on the move too. And so if he has that element of his game to where you're comfortable with him making plays for others off the dribble, can we get something that approximates what you were just talking about, where it's, can he go get his own shot more consistently? He's not too efficient on drives. He's not efficient when he's pulling up off the dribble. And does any of that come together, or is it too late for him? He was, shooting better on catch and shoot threes towards the end of this year too. That actually feels like an annual thing for him, though. I have no statistical data to back it up, but I still feel like there might be a more self-sufficient offensive player than we've seen to this point in there, particularly because of the strides he's made as a passer this year.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I'm more skeptical on like watching it and having that be the main impetus of the bubble for me is because I've put a lot of eggs in that basket before, and like he's finally proven that he's taken that step a little bit over the last few months of the season here, and I agree with you. He is a very capable playmaker, but I don't see the kind of self-creation that he has in his arsenal, where I think a lot of it is about the angles, the two defenders that are put in a pick and roll when he's the ball handler, as opposed to him just being this great scoring threat that commands such great attention. And if Orlando is going to continue on their upward trajectory and not hit this like 40-win, 45-win ceiling over the next few years, they need somebody to step up and be that guy.
Right, and that's like the big picture element of all this, because if you don't find hints of that in Fultz or Gordon during the bubble, I don't know really how they view Jonathan Isaac offensively, but he seems even further away from that type of player than Aaron Gordon or Fultz at this point. And you have to start asking difficult questions about their future, which is why should we continue floating this 40 to 45 win ceiling? At some point, it just becomes, I know Orlando's, it's a different market, so if you're going to be in the playoffs, there's value there, but at the same time, this feels like a team that could end up, I won't say taking a stick of dynamite to its roster this summer, though if I were the front office, I might consider it, but it does feel like, I don't know that there's anything they can do in the bubble to change that, but it does feel like they're going to have to undergo some sort of facelift, again, unless the player that we're both talking about now, and you specifically, emerges, or you see something in Fultz or Gordon that makes you believe that he might already be on the roster.
Yeah, they're an interesting kind of long-term case study, because I think a large part of them increasing their long-term ceiling comes down to guys like Fultz and Bamba, but I also don't know if they're going to have enough offense long-term, even if those two guys hit their ceiling.
The Brooklyn Nets are next up, currently 7th place in the Eastern Conference, and they're in a similar situation to Washington with how many bodies they're missing, but there do seem to be or no, it don't seem to be. There are, to me at least, just a few more intriguing names here to monitor. What is your question for them entering the regular season restart?
Oh boy, I guess who's going to play? Like, they're so depleted in the backcourt that I think a lot of it, what it comes down to me, is, and this is more so for how it impacts the teams that they play, but how much zone are we going to see? I think a lot of times a big strategy that the teams will throw out there when they're shorthanded, they don't have as many NBA bodies, is they try to avoid foul trouble by playing zone defense. And with Jarrett Allen in the middle, they can kind of funnel things towards him a little bit. And, Kenny Atkinson, when he was the head coach, was not shy about playing some zone defenses. So I'm wondering what Jacques Vaughn is going to do in terms of defensive strategy to make sure that they have enough healthy bodies on the floor to kind of finish this out, because I can't think of their replacement players are testing positive and can't even play. So yeah. I don't know what to make of their roster situation and how much of a threat they pose inside this bubble. It's just, how creative are they going to get with kind of extending what they have?
There's definitely that element to it. I went more, this is definitely big picture, but it's also because he's one of the players I remain so intrigued by is Karis LeVert as a lifeline right now. Is he able to play his way sort of into their future? Because right now I might default to, I think they're going to move him, if not this offseason, at some point next year, to try and get KD and Kyrie a third star. That just seems to be the direction that this franchise is all of a sudden traveling in. But if he plays well enough, can he be... I don't know if you can say that he is the ceiling of a regular third star. He might. He leads among everyone who's taking at least 3-point attempts per game this year. He leads the league in efficiency on those shots. He's hitting 41.5% of them. We saw that he could knock those down in the playoffs, where when Ben Simmons decided to delete D'Angelo Russell from the planet, it was Karis LeVert making a lot of shots for them. And I know there's some concerns about his efficiency. You would like to see him get to the line more as well. But if he does play well under these less than ideal circumstances, does it get the Nets thinking, again, not even necessarily that, hey, he's the third star, but is depth more valuable than going after that concrete third star now, just because we don't know what KD is going to look like? We know that Kyrie Irving is going to be in and out of the lineup. And so while there's a case for star power there, you're then just more open to decimation by injuries if you consolidate this talent. And so I don't know what their plans are for Jarrett Allen, just because it seems like they value DeAndre Jordan more than him now. We know what Spencer Dinwiddie is at this point too, and Karis LeVert is that swing piece. And if he plays well without any sort of safety nets around him, no Dinwiddie, no Kyrie, no KD, I'm wondering if that gets the Nets front office thinking a little bit differently than it seems like they're thinking right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's something to definitely watch here, and he's going to have more than his fair share of opportunities to carry the offense. So, again, short-term threat, don't know how much they have it, but there's a lot of long-term storylines in play. Just in general in Brooklyn, they're a really fascinating franchise.
Yeah, I don't know. I like Karis LeVert as a passer too, and you look at who's available, and it's like, who's he going to pass to? Okay, Joe Harris is there, Jarrett Allen's there. I believe Garrett Temple's there. I can't keep up with who's missing from the Nets at this point, but it could get really ugly.
It probably will get really ugly, but yes, it could, and I think that right now those three teams, and I've written about this a couple times at Celtics Blog, two of those three teams that we've discussed so far are going to get playoff series berths, and that makes getting one of the top two seeds in the Eastern Conference that much more impactful. So, I know we'll touch on this later, but from a Celtics perspective, if you're chasing down the Raptors, it may not be worth pushing Kemba Walker and his balky knee a little bit, but if you can get up to that 2 seed and draw a first round matchup with one of Brooklyn or Orlando or Washington, that's gonna help you out a lot.
Do you see a scenario, is there any way that the Wizards end up getting into the 8th spot?
Anything can happen in Disney World, Dan.
I would probably say it would be, if you had to pick one of the two incumbent playoff teams, it would have to be Brooklyn that you would pick to fall out instead of Orlando, right?
Yeah, it has to be.
Moving up, though, we have the currently 6th-seeded Philadelphia 76ers, who are one of, if not the most polarizing team in the NBA. They have moved Ben Simmons to power forward, or a better way to put it, they have moved him more so off the ball. What is your question for them?
So, a question for the Philadelphia 76ers has to do with their new starting lineup, where they've, like you mentioned, adjusted things around. They're moving Al Horford out of that first unit, which is going to increase their spacing when they add a shooter in Shake Milton. And I guess my question for them comes down to how much spacing it really provides and the pressure that it puts on the Simmons and Embiid combination to kind of play together in that spacing. I think it's only going to help them, but certainly something really fascinating to watch long term, because it's going to have ramifications on decisions that they make for those two and around those two.
Right, and look, it puts pressure on Shake Milton too. I know it's just a spacing boost because you're, displacing Horford from the starting five and putting in Shake Milton there, but he was on fire when the season sort of ended, but he doesn't have a ton of just NBA reps under his belt, and so there's still that high variance there. And I'm also, you being a coach could probably, or can definitely speak to this better than I can. I don't like, how much space does it actually create when Simmons and Embiid are still on the court, but they're both maybe off the ball on possessions where it was never really like that before?
Yeah, for me, it comes down to post-ups. Like, Embiid needs the ball in the post, and when Simmons is out there, that's one non-shooter to kind of help off of. I think that they need the other three guys to be able to consistently knock down catch-and-shoot threats. And the catch-22 of this is the bigger the Sixers play, like when they had Horford at the 4 and they put Simmons at more of a guard spot, they need him to take those size mismatches onto the interior. And if you have Embiid and somebody else who's a bigger body standing outside of him, then you're all of a sudden sucking away that space. So you're almost damned if you do, damned if you don't, from a kind of a changing of things at this bubble standpoint right now, because you risk losing a little bit of the chemistry and making that Al Horford contract look a little bit unnecessary. But
a little bit unnecessary.
A little bit. But it's something that they definitely have to try in order to see if they can maximize these two together, because we're at the point where they're just kind of hitting this like 3 seed type of ceiling, and they need to be able to break through that.
And so my question was basically similar to yours. Literally in my notes I have written, can this roster work? And Look, the numbers, they support what's happening with the lineup right now, because Philly's offense rates in the 93rd percentile when Simmons and Embiid play without Horford on the floor. And then you were just talking about those Simmons-Horford lineups. When Embiid's not on the court, their offense is in the 84th percentile during those minutes. And so it seems like it will work, or that it has worked against like pretty substantial sample sizes. We're talking about almost 2,000 possessions for the Simmons-Horford minutes without Embiid, and then the sub 800 possessions for Simmons and Embiid without Horford. But you need to also find a balance, because you already brought it up. You can't have just given Al Horford that contract to be a 15 to 18 to 21 minute per game player. That's a huge amount of money, a huge resource to expend on someone who now you just want to play when Embiid's not on the floor. And yes, he provides you sort of with like this airtight safety net, because we've seen them by and large win the minutes without Embiid on the court, which torpedoed their playoff chances last year, essentially. But you signed him. He has 3 years and $69 million guaranteed, $81 million total left on his deal. Like, you can't pay that money for, I won't even say a heavily used bench player. This isn't Montrezl Harrell minutes that he'd be getting. If you really want to stagger them, we might be looking at Horford playing, 20, 22 minutes a game. And so it's going to be interesting to see how Brett Brown sort of toggles with these lineups, and how much Embiid, Horford, Simmons together that we actually do see.
Yeah, and it's, from even my perspective in looking at it, the Sixers have a first-round draft pick and then like 4 or 5 second-round selections this year. And how they deem their playing style best is going to impact the choices that they make in the draft, with what players they see as long-term fits and kind of the right flyers to take on people that can make a short-term and long-term impact. So it's incredibly important that they at least get an answer for how do we want to play, how do we believe we can play and win, because they've been, as talented as they are, top to bottom, they've been very slow and methodical on offense, and they have too many kind of, that Embiid-Horford pairing can be a little bit difficult in terms of perimeter defense. So they've got to shore up some things and just figure out what they want to commit to, because right now it seems like what they've tried for the first 8 or 9 months of the season since they signed Horford isn't what they want to commit to right now.
Do you think in retrospect that it seemed like a lot of people were high on the signing? I was probably more curious, or I'll say verging on supportive of it. But in retrospect, it's like, for a team that doesn't really run those pick and rolls, how is Horford ever going to be? That's part of his bread and butter on offense, where those pick and pops, and those are just the number of screens he's setting, and then those plays specifically, they're just way down compared to what he was doing in Boston.
Yeah, and pick and pops only work if people are going to fear and the big is going to help at all on a shooter who comes out off that ball screen. And right now, he doesn't really have a true pick and roll partner to go with that. So, it wasn't my favorite signing. I get kind of why they did it, because he was Embiid's foil, and I think that it would have given them Simmons at a guard spot, and he's in a vacuum, kind of this shooting big man, but he hasn't shot it great. And again, if he's shooting on high volume, that's a win for the defense.
And they're also the team with like that high variance of outcomes, and we can probably say this in the West almost annually, where you could envision a team making the finals or losing in the first round. But in the East, it's so rare, particularly when there is that power vacuum still. There's Milwaukee at the top, but the East still feels wide open. And yet with the Sixers, would it be shocking to see them come out of the East? Maybe, probably not. But it also wouldn't be shocking if they just flamed out in the first round.
Yeah, they're the ultimate wild card, and again, they're not a team that I would want to play in the first round, which is why I'm thinking getting up to that 2 spot is going to be so valuable for whoever earns it.
Yeah, I agree with you there. If you're the Sixers, though, who would you rather face, the Raptors or the Celtics?
I think Boston.
I think I'm with you there as well. They feel like they could really, and I know it won't always work, and I'd probably still pick Boston in that series, but there's an element of they could really just bully what is a smaller team to submission. And yet Boston's defense this year, they have a top 5 offense and defense. They've just been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I think that it all comes down to kind of the size of Siakam at the 4 for Toronto, his ability to he just matches up really, really well against Philly. So if I'm the Sixers, I'm hoping for Boston.
The next team up, the 5th place Indiana Pacers. What is your question for them? And I feel like there could be a crap ton for this team at this point after the Sabonis news.
Yeah, it's unfortunate news because he's had such a great year. For me, it's kind of the short-term, long-term debate, because they're right on that borderline of how aggressively do we push. And since we're down here, we should make something out of it. I want to know what they do with Victor Oladipo. So I know that's been something that is kind of up in the air in a lot of different circumstances about how heavily to rely on him. Is he going to actually get any minutes because he's decently healthy and returning to form? But if they get into a close series, what does that look like for him? And that's just something that I'm really curious with as he recovers from his injuries.
My stance would be that they just shouldn't play him at this point. Sabonis is gone. It was a long shot for them to really do anything this year. Anyway, you're missing Jeremy Lamb, and even if Oladipo plays, I know he started perking up on offense towards right before the NBA shut down, but there still seems like a high variance of outcomes for him as well. So I would just not play him at this point. And my initial question for them would have been, what's their ceiling without Oladipo? And now it's, what does this team do without Sabonis and Oladipo? And my focus might be, what would it kind of look like if Miles Turner just had a ton of offensive responsibility? And I'm not saying I'm rooting for that, but that would be interesting to watch. And so I'm with you on the Oladipo one. That would be my question: is does he play? How much does he play? What happens from there? What ends up being their ceiling during those minutes? But to deviate, I'm wondering if both Oladipo and Sabonis are out, or if Oladipo's super limited and then Sabonis is out for the rest of the season, even though we know he is still hoping to return. Who does that benefit the most, or who do we see pick up the bulk of the opportunity that's available? And I think it would be Miles Turner, just because you can't really expand anything that Malcolm Brogdon is doing. Maybe you can ask for more from a Justin Holiday or a TJ Warren, but I think a lot would fall onto Miles Turner in that situation.
Yeah, maybe perhaps they go that way. I love Brogdon, man. He's probably the most underrated player. Dude had a 50-40-90 year last year, and no one talks about it. He's so good.
He's been banged up a bunch of times too this year.
Yeah.
They've not had the best luck with injuries this season.
Yeah. So they're again, there's just so many teams are not themselves as they get down here in Orlando, and unfortunately, that's going to be kind of a last man standing type of mentality as we get all the way to probably the conference semifinals or maybe even the conference finals. But it's unfortunate, all the injuries, all the difficulty that they've had keeping their core on the court together, because it's a really, really talented, fun one.
And look, now you're at the point where you're not even going to get, I think the Sabonis-Turner fit, they've made it work, but it could be better. And now you're just, you're being robbed of yet a more sample size with those two on the court if Sabonis misses the rest of the year or most of it. And then Victor Oladipo is going to be a free agent in 2021. He can sign an extension too. And if he doesn't play or if he's super limited, it just makes deciding how to handle your imminent future so much harder. And maybe that always would have been the case because, as you just said, most of these teams just aren't themselves, even if they have most of their personnel available. But that's still just like, I just reconciling their future now becomes so much tougher following this Sabonis injury.
Agree.
Sports are back, and so are your chances to bet on your favorite teams and events. Major League Baseball is finally kicking off, and there's no better place to start wagering than our exclusive partners, BetOnline. Check out all the odds, futures, and props to bet on, all available 24/7. And with the return of sports, BetOnline sat down with former pro players Eddie George, Harold Reynolds, and 7-time NBA champ Robert Horry. See what they had to say on what it'll be like playing without fans in a series they're calling Fandemic. Visit betonline.ag for all your odds and up-to-date sports news. Remember to use promo code BLUEWIRE, all one word, to receive your new welcome bonus. That's promo code BLUEWIRE. BetOnline, your online wagering experts.
The Miami Heat, number 4 in the Eastern Conference. I would say that's probably a pleasant surprise for most, or at least them being 17 games under 500. I'm not sure that's something many people saw coming. It certainly wasn't what I saw coming. What's your question for them?
Oof. So I think probably the under the radar statistic of the year is that Jimmy Butler has shot 24.8% from 3 on almost 2.5 attempts a game. Like he is really struggling from downtown. And despite that, Miami is first in team 3-point percentage. So like their entire game is predicated on the spacing around him. And they would be so light years ahead on offense if he was up to his normal, like 32, 33%. So I guess for me, like, I don't know if it's tailored at one player or the whole team, but like, are they going to be able to live by the 3, die by the 3 the way that they have? Because again, top team in 3-point percentage throughout the first part of the season before the interruption, and they give up the fewest 2-point field goal attempts per game. So like they take a ton of threes, they force a ton of threes, and it works for them.
Right.
But they need to bank on their shooting remaining hot, Jimmy's getting better, and other teams having kind of a cold streak when they enter the bubble, which is something that, at least through the first couple scrimmages, we're seeing. Like, it's going to take a while for rhythm for jump shooters to come back.
The way that Jimmy Butler is still able to just get to the foul line roughly a trillion times per game, despite like his complete absence of a jump shot this year, is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
My question for them is, how does the integration of Andre Iguodala and Jay Crowder end up going? And they had a small sample leading into the NBA's hiatus, but they were pretty rigidly staggering the minutes of Jimmy Butler and Iguodala, and I'm wondering if that would change at all in the postseason. Do they try and expand Iguodala's role, or is he going to be a sub 20 minutes per game player for them? The way they were kind of staggering Justice Winslow at the beginning of the year from Jimmy Butler, are they going to run into the same issues with Iggy and Butler? Should they try to play them together? With Crowder specifically, he was shooting the ball very well upon arriving in Miami, but you have him at the 4, and does that work with Bam Adebayo at the 5? Because as good as Bam Adebayo is, putting him in the middle, I feel like doesn't really guarantee you a great defense. And in the time that he's already spent with Crowder, the Heat are coughing up more than 119 points per 100 possessions and almost 65% shooting at the rim. Again, it's a small sample, but if you're trying to go with the look where I feel like they're probably better off looking at their roster, having that smaller 4 on the court, particularly when they're closing games, I want to see how that ends up doing defensively. And then back to Iguodala for a second, does he close games for them? I think the gut feeling right now, I guess, would be no, but at the same time, it's like, well, isn't that kind of why you brought him in? And so I'm just very interested to see how both of these players are used and how Miami ultimately fares.
Yeah. Yeah, it's they're a type of team that has so many different, I guess, types of pieces that they can play that are like good NBA caliber rotation players, but in any combination that they put of them on the floor, there's going to be some weakness. And I guess it's about tailor-making that to an opponent, guessing right on opponent rotations and schemes, and really coming up with a game plan to maximize every single player and how they fit together. Like, I love Duncan Robinson. I think Kelly Olynyk is kind of underrated in a lot of senses because he just produces when he's out there. But they have limitations on the types of things that they can do on the floor when they trot, like you say, an Adebayo Crowder lineup, or Olynyk at the 4, or Myers Leonard at the 4. Like, there are different things that they can't do as a result.
And you look at their best perimeter defenders. I would probably say they're 4 best, even though Crowder has been shooting really well since arriving in Miami. Like, they're not actual great shooters. Just looking at Jimmy Butler, Derrick Jones Jr. obviously, and then Jay Crowder and Iguodala. And so you're talking about their 3-point clips, and it almost just feels like something doesn't add up there. And so does that come back to is there going to be is that luck in any way? Because I know Duncan Robinson is a great shooter, but does that end up translating against postseason defenses?
Right. Yeah, to me, they have literally 13 guys, 12 guys that they could throw in there and give solid playoff rotation minutes to. But outside of Adebayo and Butler, I don't know who I trust on both sides of the ball right now.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. And Derrick Jones Jr. might actually be the closest just because of what he can do in transition, but the complete absence of a jump shot also kind of kills him there. Number 3 in the East, though, the Boston Celtics. I'm interested to see what your question is for them now because I feel like I know what it is.
Yeah, so I mean, we hinted at it a little bit earlier that a lot of this comes down to different tiers, and I think now we're in that tier of 3 teams who are like legitimate threats to go through the Eastern Conference and challenge for the NBA Finals, no matter what their matchups are and who they face. So with Boston, a lot of it comes down to the seeding games. A lot of it comes down to essentially just Kemba Walker's health and how much his knee becomes a postseason storyline. Because if he's able to play and push through and help propel them up to maybe the 2 seed where they catch Toronto, that gives them a far different path, but it also could have long-term ramifications. Vice versa, if they don't and they stay pretty steady in their 3 spot, does a rested Kemba mean that they're going to be able to get past Philadelphia or Indiana in the first round without any issues? So just so many questions about Kemba right now that I'm not very comfortable with all the information that we've seen that's been out there right now.
Yeah, that knee is, if he ends up missing time or just isn't himself and struggling, that ends up being huge because I think Boston's so intriguing, at least to someone like me, because they're the best pull-up jump shooting team in the NBA. By effective field goal percentage. Kemba is a part of that. Jason Tatum obviously as well. And that would be my question, since you took the Kemba Walker one, is I personally think this season, looking at the stars that were absent or didn't play a ton of minutes, you can say that Jason Tatum added close to top 10 value in the league. And I don't think that that's a hot take. Is he ready now, though, to be that best player on a viable championship contender? And that's not, I think people have sort of underplayed his rise where they think he just played really well for a month, and it's really just been most of this season. He's been fantastic for them, even the things that he's able to do on defense. And we've seen him play well in the playoffs before, but the circumstances are just different because this is just officially his team, his offense, and now you have more pressure on him if Kemba Walker is limited or if his shots just aren't falling at their normal clip. And I don't think this is a case where he needs to validate his stardom. I think that he has done that, but is he, are we still a year or 2 out from him being the number 1 on a team that we can say will or can actually win the title? And so contention in the East is sort of fickle because there are so many teams that you can envision coming out of the conference. But if you pit them against the Clippers or the Lakers, I think their cases look a lot different. Just because, or the Bucks, obviously, can Boston be the biggest problem to Milwaukee? A lot of that falls on Jason Tatum's shoulders as well. And so I'm very interested, the word that I keep coming back to during this podcast, to see what he ends up doing in the postseason. And I don't know, people will be critical of him either way, but you almost hope, just from an objective standpoint,
that we get like a sample that we can really read into. You want Kemba Walker to be fully healthy because that's going to help make sure that Tatum's operating under normal circumstances so that he's not, shouldering a heavier burden than he normally would. And so they're just going to be, with that Kemba knee, as you already mentioned, as the wild card, they're just going to be a team that a ton of eyes are going to be on entering the postseason.
Yep, I agree. And I don't think that they need Kemba for necessarily offensive production. I think their offense, like you said, is going to be fine because Tatum has risen to that level now, but they don't have the perimeter depth. They have 5 guys that can play on the perimeter with Kemba, Smart, Hayward, Jalen, and Jason. They really only have those 5 guys that you trust in a playoff series. Wanamaker can spot you 6 to 8 minutes.
Right.
And without Kemba, it just stretches everybody else so thin that I worry more about what it does to their second unit minutes when they elevate Marcus Smart into that first group, as opposed to, what's their offense going to look like? Where are they going to score? How are they going to make shots? No, it's just they're going to have some empty calories on the floor as a result. And typically you don't win an NBA championship or make it to the NBA Finals with that.
First of all, one of my favorite stats this season is that Marcus Smart is shooting north of 40% on pull-up three-pointers, which is just amazing. And it's on actual volume too. But I'm almost wondering, I totally agree with the depth point, but I am sort of wondering if Kemba Walker is so important to what they do offensively, because who aside from Tatum are you trusting to just go out and get you that shot from scratch? And I do feel like you need that sort of 1-2 punch in the playoffs, and Jaylen Brown really isn't that player. He can put pressure on the rim, but he's not going to, face up and hit these difficult jumpers, or he's not going to really, he can initiate maybe his own offense, but he's not going to be the table setter for anyone else. That falls on, Marcus Smart can do some of that, but his off the dribble jumper, we'll just say, is high variance, might be the most complimentary way to say this. And so I kind of feel like just how Boston's generated a ton of its offense this season, that Kemba ends up being really important to their just raw production too.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
That brings us to number 2 in the East, the Toronto Raptors. What is your question for them? So
I don't know if it's a question for them as much as it is a question for us, but are we sleeping on the Toronto Raptors again? This team is really good, and it's so easy to just dismiss it as, well, they don't have Kawhi Leonard anymore. They are so good top to bottom in every regard. They're well coached. Their offense is tremendous and well spaced, simplistic. Everybody shoots it. Everybody makes the right play. They have fantastic kind of principles and tendencies as in terms of extra passes and how they share and move the ball. They're really tight defensively in a lot of ways. They have length. They have strength. It's hard to individually mismatch them one-on-one because everybody is a solid or above average defender. I don't know what the hole is on this team. And for me, I'm hoping and waiting for Pascal Siakam to be the guy who steps up and takes the reins in the series away from Kyle Lowry doing a lot of the offensive creation. I think Siakam's probably ready for that. So if I were to kind of come up with one question about them, I guess it's is he ready to be that guy? But to me, the answer is yes, and they are such a solid, well-built, all-around team.
Yeah, I respect that head coach Nick Nurse has really tried to, I don't want to use the word force, but he's left Siakam in that initiator role at times, even when it wasn't going well, because they're so clearly focused on, they're good now, but they need him to be that player for the future. So I'm with you. To me, he's closer to ready than not.
Yep.
My question for them is what the half-court offense ends up looking like in the playoffs, because I feel like their offense overall this year was floated by a ton of transition volume, which is absolutely great, but I feel like those opportunities can be tougher to come by in the postseason, or at least defenses will make more adjustments to it or be better prepared for it, particularly over the course of an entire series. And they just don't really have, when you're looking at the pick and rolls that they're going to run, they don't have someone who's going to put a ton of pressure on the rim. And, Kyle Lowry's never really been that player. Fred VanVleet, more of that player, but a questionable finisher there. And so I'm wondering if they were mediocre to begin with offensively. They're 18th in points scored per half-court possession this season. And I'm just wondering if they have the potential to suffer an even larger drop-off. I think it helps that, they're top 10 in both three-point volume and efficiency, but there just feels something off or missing from their offense still, and a lot of that just might come down to the Pascal Siakam question is going to matter too. Is can he put a ton of pressure on the rim coming out of pick and rolls? How much do defenses respect his pull-up jumper, and if they're going to give it to him, is he going to hit it at a high clip? And so that might take care of some of it. But their half-court offense in general, I'm very interested to see how it ends up playing out now that they don't have Kawhi Leonard in this situation.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the reasons why that's not a huge concern for me, I'll just kind of give you two points here. One, everybody in their normal rotation shoots at above 34% from three. Like, everybody is very good. Looking at the page, Lowry's 35, Van Vliet's 39, Siakam 36, Anunoby 38, Powell 40, Gasol 40, Ibaka 40, Terrence Davis 40. Like, everybody that they have shoots it from a really high percentage from three, and that helps space the floor. The other thing, which is the second point, their two center kind of combinations of Gasol and Ibaka are both 40%. And what that does in a postseason series, it'll suck the rim protection away from the basket and help kind of their field goal efficiency at the rim. And that's really, I think, where postseason games are won and lost. Like, obviously the difficulty of creating points and manufacturing clean looks the difficulty's insane in the postseason. And what you need to do is be able to convert at the rim and convert on your 3-point attempts when you get them. And I see from both a statistical standpoint and the theoretical of who their shooters are, especially at the 5 spot, it's just their offense is going to be fine in my book.
And maybe I'm just underestimating them also having, Norman Powell has been really good on offense this year. And so just the element of having so many options. Another question I would have for them, this is more so for the people that are going to be watching the games, is what is the player on this team where national fans, people who didn't follow the Raptors closely throughout the regular season, come away realizing they're really good. And so it's like below the Siakam, even Van Fleet tier, where is it Norman Powell? Is it Terrence Davis, who I think needs to get more playing time than he was receiving when the league closed its doors? Is it Chris Boucher? This is going to be an awakening for people who didn't follow the Raptors closely, and I'm just wondering what player really sort of sways them. Anunoby too. So that's going to be sort of the reactions to the Raptors. I think are going to be fun to monitor.
I agree. Yeah, and I love all those guys. So we'll see which one steps up.
Yeah, it's tough to pick. As someone who's not really a fan of any team, even though I grew up a Knicks fan, I become emotionally attached to 1, 2, or 3 teams a year. And this year, that was the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Raptors, just because even if you expected both of them to remain intact for the full season, just neither of them were supposed to be at this level. And the Raptors specifically, I thought I was higher on them than most when I predicted I think that they would finish 4th in the East. And they're second right now. Yeah. And so the race with the Celtics definitely matters, but they also have a 3-game lead in the loss column.
Yeah, they're really, really good, Dan.
The Bucks, number 1. What is your question for them?
It's so a lot of this comes down to this theory that I have that Mike Budenholzer has this reputation, and I don't know how deserving it is, but he has this reputation that he's not willing to adjust in postseason series, that he has the way that he wants to do things, his system, his structure on both ends of the floor, and they're going to stick to it. If they go down, they're going to go down swinging with that identity. And for me, I think that postseason Giannis is a lot easier to defend than regular season Giannis, because you can really predict Milwaukee's rotations and kind of decide who you want to put on them. Like, if you're going to put a smaller guy, like I've always advocated for the Celtics, putting Marcus Smart on him and trying to crowd his dribble so that he's not keeping it too attached to him. You can put a bigger guy on him and put one of your smaller ones guarding, like Brook Lopez and a shooter, and say, hey, I dare you to take me down into the post, and I'm going to help heavily, and we're just going to beat the crap out of Giannis physically. So there are a lot of different ways the teams might try to play Giannis. And what I'm curious to see, to kind of wrap this long-winded question up, is how Budenholzer tinkers with his lineups and schemes to directly counter the way that their postseason opponents defend Giannis.
Yeah, that is the biggest criticism with him, and I do believe he's at least shown more flexibility than people probably credit him for. I mean, Chris Middleton might even be an example where this season they let him like take more of those mid-rangers that he's both comfortable with and really good at. Maybe that's not the best evidence, but it at least shows some, just malleability there. You bring up, this wasn't my question for them. That's why I'm like stumbling through it, because it's so interesting to think about the way it comes back to what you mentioned about Giannis and how you think that he's easier to defend in the postseason. That's something I've sort of harped on when people say that they don't think Chris Middleton is like this real number 2. And I'm like, this is coming from someone who rated Giannis as the best player in the league this year. So it's not that I don't like Giannis, but isn't there a chance that if Chris Middleton isn't enough as the number 2 on this team, that it says more, or at least just as much, about Giannis? Because would you say that LeBron can't win a title with Middleton as his number 2, or Kawhi with Middleton as his number 2, and that the bigger problem might be that Giannis is potentially easier to defend in the postseason than it is that, Chris Middleton can't carry the Bucks completely when Giannis is struggling?
Yeah, look, Giannis being easier to guard in the postseason doesn't mean he's easy to guard. Like, he's still the toughest matchup in the NBA. But when you are in a post, and we saw it with Toronto last year, it's why they beat the Bucks. They loaded up their entire defensive strategy on Giannis and forced him different directions, played blocks and elbows coverage where they were just really blanketing any drive that he made in the middle third of the floor. And if you can create a scheme like that you're going to just hammer home, night in, night out for 2 weeks, it can be impactful. So I think it's incumbent not just on Giannis and Middleton to be the guys that are producing and carrying the offense despite that, but it's on Budenholzer to say, like, okay, if they're going to do this and they're going to put a smaller guy on Brook Lopez, like, maybe we need to go a little bit smaller and play Giannis in those death lineup minutes at the 5. Like,
they have destroyed opponents during those minutes this year too.
They have, and again, I don't think Budenholzer is inflexible. I think that's a pretty unfair reputation that he has, but it's certainly in the postseason a lot harder to commit to and a lot more noticeable when something like that happens. So we'll see exactly, again, how he plans to counter the teams that have those Giannis rules, so to speak, for them in the playoffs.
And so you kind of touched on what my question was, and that is, I think you could focus on Eric Bledsoe specifically because he's been so bad on offense the past 2 postseasons, basically. But how are Eric Bledsoe and Brook Lopez going to shoot it? Because one of the things that maybe isn't talked about enough, at least nationally, is that Brook Lopez is just not shooting well from 3 this year. 29.2% on wide open 3-pointers. And those account for a great deal of his 3-pointers. And he can do other stuff, and he's become, it's amazing, it feels like as he's aged, like he's just become more matchup proof on defense, or at least people have appreciated him there more. But if he's not hitting his threes, and then you're dealing with Bledsoe, who's still barely shooting 35% on wide open threes himself this year, those open up other questions for the team, and one of them might be, do we need to go, as you already mentioned, smaller with Giannis at the 5, but you also just need to have other shot makers on this team, and do you have the guts to be like, well, we're going to take Bledsoe's all defense off the court, and then we're going to roll with George Hill, or can Dante DiVincenzo maybe fill like a little bit of every gap, because that's what it seems like he does for this team. And so the 3-point efficiency from Bledsoe and Brolo, I think, is going to end up being not only huge for what the lineups look like on the floor, but just Milwaukee in general throughout the postseason.
Yeah. They're a team that, because of how Giannis plays, they have to make shots, and they've done so at a blistering pace the last 2 seasons, and that's why they've been so good on offense. But, I hate to say that it all comes down to shooting, but in effect, like, your success, it all comes down to, can you put the ball in the basket? Like, are you going to make the shots that you get?
Do you think Giannis has added enough depth to his shot selection that he's now a little bit harder to defend, just because he's more inclined to take pull-up threes now, and he seems more confident in his stop and fades, and those are shots that are not being downed at a high clip, but I'm wondering if him taking them in higher volume at all helps, or if it really just doesn't matter unless they're falling at a more consistent clip.
Yeah, I think it helps. Again, I'm not one who plays defense solely based on the numbers, but I think the thing that's hurting him a little bit is, like, he's not converting when he gets to the free throw line as much as he has. His free throw percentage has dipped quite a bit this year. So whether it's like an over-reliance on fixing and tweaking and thinking about his shooting mechanics, like something is not kind of not carrying over from there to the free throw line right now. And when he's more aggressive, when he goes to the rim a little bit more confidently, and I think that there's a certain level of focus that you get when you get to the free throw line as a result of that. And when you take a ton of jump shots, it can wane a little bit because you lull yourself into thinking that you're in this rhythm and it's okay. Like, he still needs to be a guy that his mechanics aren't great. He needs to focus on every shot. So again, it's nitpicky. Like, he's the best player in the world right now, and I don't think that's too much up for debate. Like, he's become such an unbelievably good individual defender. Mm-hmm. He's a terror in transition. He takes 10 free throws a game. Like, he's a nightmare to guard. But if we're talking about, splitting hairs and trying to figure out exactly what teams are going to do to them in the postseason so that they minimize the impact that he has to find a way to overcome that. And whether that's through playmaking and passing to others who knock down shots, or, like you mentioned, having that confidence in his jumper to take them when they dare him and make them, he needs to be the one that steps up and makes those right plays.
Yeah, the free throw shooting is an interesting point. It's one of those things that but at least for me, I just keep forgetting about. 63.3% at the foul line, and then again, he didn't shoot it well in the playoffs last year, 63.7% from the foul line. And so you definitely, with the amount that he attacks the rim and then does get to the line, you don't want to be put in a position where teams might just be inclined to even try and foul him later in games. His free throw percentage isn't that low, but 63.7 for an entire season, 63.3, excuse me, that's super low, and it's like almost a 9-point drop off from last season. And look, all this stuff matters. Nitpicking, I think, is fair here because he is Supermax eligible, can be a free agent in 2021 if he doesn't sign it. You have to ask these questions. And if the Bucks don't come out of the East, I think they'll be subject to either, they're going to be subject to scrutiny no matter what happens unless they win the title. But if you don't come out of the East after the season that you just had, I know there are extenuating circumstances, but that's when you have to look at, I don't think you move him. That's not something I would do. I would just let his free agency plays out unless he demands a trade. But you do have to look at making changes to the roster. I don't know what those necessarily could be. I've been an advocate of, since last summer that I thought, go out and try and trade for Chris Paul. It's just they have to give up so many of their players to make the math work. But if you don't come out of the East after the season that you had, that's the type of change that you're going to have to be looking at.
Yeah. So I'm all in on Giannis staying there for the rest of his career. I don't think Milwaukee should ever consider not bringing out the Brinks truck and backing it up for him. But it's just the postseason and the regular season are not always the same game, and that's where that diversity of skills that you have to be good at a lot of different things. And Giannis is great in so many areas, but he still does fall short in a couple ways, and that's his perimeter shooting, how he converts at the free throw line, and just with the size that he has and the types of role players they have around him, there are ways to kind of choose what shots the Bucks take for them.
Spins, this was great. I appreciate you giving me so much of your time. Always love talking to someone who knows the game as well as you do. Once more, if you guys are not following Adam on Twitter, find him at Spinella14, spelled exactly as it sounds. Finally, please rate, review, and subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever else you're consuming your podcast if you have not done that already. But Spins, once again, thank you so much for the conversation. And as you know, as I always tell you, I will most definitely be pestering you again in the future.
We'll be back. Always love being here. Always great to talk to you, Dan. Thank you. And hoops are back, baby. So we'll be having some fun now.